Hi everyone, delonewolf here and welcome back to EVE Talk, your weekly look at the market in EVE Online. And well, I don't have that much news when it comes to EVE Online, but I did, and no, I don't want to install an OBS update right now. I did join the mass test, which does add an interesting mechanic to the game, basically a hard limit to bumping. If anyone hasn't seen it yet, CCP is planning to add an additional timer when you're starting to warp. That is basically trying to establish a warp vector, and no matter what happens, even if you're stuck in a structure or if you're being bumped, after 3 minutes that timer will be completed and you will warp even if you're not aligned or not at speed. So that's a very interesting change. Of course, it is going to make ganking in high-sec higher, although the main goal is to help people who get stuck in structures, because they of course can be aligned in any which way, which can cause quite a few problems when it comes to warping to, let's say, a Stargate right after you undock and things like that. So even my processing at Tenor is actually not well aligned for most belts in the Detail system. I've in fact had to fly for I don't know, 30 seconds or so with the Orca on the undock and only then turn around and fly to one of the belts. So this is gonna help with that. If you do get stuck in a structure, just wait out until the system actually basically calculates your vector and off you go. It worked pretty well, and overall the mass test I think was quite positive. The client worked quite nicely, and there was some post-processing things. I'm not a big graphics expert, so I couldn't really tell the difference, but I felt like everything was working quite well, so I'm looking forward to the September release. Now, next to the mass test and EVE Online news, I am personally really curious as to the impact of WoW Classic on the numbers, because to be honest, it's an incredible success. If you look at all the hype that has been built around there, 1.2 million viewers on Twitch on the launch of WoW Classic, queues of 20,000 people. We have to be honest, when it comes to scale, there are 20,000 people in the queue on one server for WoW Classic is pretty much the average population of the EVE Online server. So it's just an incredible hype right now. I myself have spent a lot of time in WoW Classic as well, and I'm going to do my best to balance WoW and EVE, but it is not easy, we'll see how that evolves as well, of course. And then also the announcement, Homeworld 3 is coming. I'm really curious to see how that is going to be developed, how that game is going to shape out, because that's another space game, and for people that want that space itch, it's not exactly direct competition for EVE Online, but you know, having some more sci-fi games is always welcome, and I'm a huge fan of Homeworld myself. I've played all of those games, especially the first one was an insane experience. So yeah, another thing to look out for, to be honest. Let's take a quick look at the New Eden store here. We still have, of course, the Vital Shift, the latest skin, front and center. If you want to support CCP, honestly, just look at that Sharon skin. It looks crazy good in my opinion. And then we also have one sale for the skill extractors, 15% off. That is pretty nice. We'll have to see if that has an impact on the market. Normally it should do. So let's jump right in. Let's go to the market and let's start with some plex and stuff, and that's gonna be at 350. Like that. Okay, let's get started here with plex, and you can already tell from the ticker probably 3.8 million at this point in Jita, so back up a little bit, and 3.6 million for the buyers. If we go to the player-owned trade hubs, just below 3.8 million, so we can see a narrowing of the margin between sellers in the trade hubs and the player-owned trade hubs. Kind of strange, of course. You would think that once the tax change have created a certain margin in the market, it would pretty much be able to keep that, to maintain that, but nope, that's not happening right now. That gap has pretty much been closed, so people still do do a lot of trading in GTA 4 and it still has a major impact on even the plex market. So we can clearly tell here that we're not going that much lower at this point. 3.5 million on the daily averages. Let's see where the buyers come in for the player on Twitter. 3.6 million. So we obviously are going to move up here all of a sudden towards the 3.6, 3.7 million average. We'll see how it evolves, of course. This would be a very early low point, although no, that's actually a summer low point. It might make sense. 3.36 million at the lowest, and then now we start to go back up, especially if CCP doesn't come with more sales, which you can see right here from the volume. That was obviously a sale. And if CCP can, of course, build some hype, perhaps a winter expansion, perhaps some interesting changes coming to the game, we'll see how CCP decides to handle that, of course. Next up, we'll take a quick look at the multiple pilot trades. If it's continuing a slow down trend, that is kind of strange. It is slowing down substantially at this point, but staying well below 1.5 billion should mean decent margins for the skill farms. 1.5 million for the sellers, less than 1.4 billion for the buyers. That's a substantial margin as well, and seeing this maintain this downward trend and basically this price point below 1.5 billion when plex actually shoot back up a little bit is a little bit of a surprise. Next up, we have the skill extractors. Alright, CCP sale is coming through on the price, not really on the volumes. That to me is quite interesting as well, because I am curious as to how much demand there still is right now for skill points, considering all the skill points that we've received from CCP throughout the summer just for basically logging in and getting rid of a couple of rats. So perhaps a lot of the newer players as well, if they stuck to it, will now find little need to actually grab skill injectors, and so the skill extractors may not be that popular right now, and so we don't see the big volume spike just yet. We'll see in the upcoming week, of course, if that does still happen. But let's take a look at those skill injectors next. They were continuing on the downtrend. We're actually stalling at 800 million ISK, but that's a pretty substantial drop, of course, from 1 billion to 800 million ISK. And you can see here, in my opinion, at the tail end, we're still seeing pressure. The 20-day moving average is clearly still going down at this point. Let's see how close we are to that 800 million. Whoa, first sellers coming in for less than 800 million. The competition is starting here. That is very interesting. 781 for the buyers. Not that big of a margin, so I don't see large scale injectors dropping off a cliff. But to me, it does look like there is a bit of a disconnect between plex increasing now and the large skill injectors, and I think it's all the extra skill points that we managed to accrue over the summer with the skilling spree, and now also in the last weekend with the login rewards and things like that, that it is basically slowing down demand for skill injectors right now, which to me indicates perhaps there is an opportunity. The way I see it, if plex continues to rise, but large scale injectors can continue to maybe go down a little bit more, can we buy them for less than 800 million ISK? Absolutely. If this difference remains for like another week or so, I think that indicates that we should grab these large scale injectors, because eventually that demand will come back, of course, and then we might have a very good investment on our hand, and we might even have an indication that the price is going back up if plex continues to go back up as well. So very interesting situation here with, in my opinion, a logical explanation why you have sort of a delay between the plex increase and the skill injector increase, which hasn't manifested yet. Let's take a look at the small scale injectors. Very similar pattern. You can see that the 20-day moving average is still edging down, although the latest daily average is up just a little bit, so we're in that hesitation period. 167 million for the sellers, 156 for the buyers. Pretty obvious that we also have a rather narrow margin here, so we don't have room to drop off a cliff anymore, in my opinion. But if we can maintain this this difference in action between plex and the injectors for like maybe a couple more days or a week or so, I think we could have basically all the clues we need to get that investment going. And then finally we have the daily alpha injectors, which were trending pretty low at around 50 million ISK. We're not really seeing like a sale impact, because then you would have a volume spike like right here late December, but nope, we're staying below average. 54 million for the sellers, 48.5 million for the buyers. And again, this is another one that, you know, kind of indicates my theory that right now there's not a lot of demand. There's a bit of a slump in demand of skill points because of CCP's actions, of course. And at some point, if now we don't get skill points for a couple of months and then they come out with perhaps some Triglavian ships or something like that that we need to skill for, then we might see a surge in demand all of a sudden, and then these would make very good investments, especially considering the 20% drop that we just saw in the last 2 months. So pretty interesting times in the plex stuff category. Let's move on to the minerals, coming in at 1025 like that. And let's get started here. Titanium giving back some ground, diving back under the 7 ISK range, but doing quite okay in my opinion. If we go for the JITA prices, I mean, you get a little bit of competition in the perimeter market as well, but a lot of it is outside of the perimeter market. I think that basically JITA is still the reference point here. 694 for the sellers, 650 for the buyers. That is still a more than reasonable price. It's a decent margin that's starting to open up here between sellers and buyers, so look out for that downwards potential. But overall, this is actually a great price for titanium, even historically speaking. Very close to a 1-year high point, and I don't think that you have any doubts that this is well above average for the last year, where we've struggled at 4.5 ISK for most of it. Let's see if pyrite can continue its ascent. Well, it's peaked out at above 6 ISK apparently on one day, but it is already coming back down a little bit. So let's see how strong it manages to maintain its price. 476 for the sellers, 446 for the buyers. Well, if we again look at this 1-year chart, then we're selling way above average, 3.5 to 4 ISK for most of the year. Now finally 4 to 5 has been possible in the last couple of weeks, so that is good news. But that massive drawback is a bit of a worry, especially on the lack of volume. So despite the fact that we don't see like really a lot of trading or anything like that, we do see these jitters in the price and that pressure at the tail end. We're gonna have to keep a close eye on that, I think, because if we break back down towards like 4 ISK, then that might not be good news for titanium, for instance. Next up, we have the Mexilon market that is actually going for a 1-year low point below 55 ISK. We're talking 53 for the sellers and 49 for the buyers. Yep, there's just a lack of demand in Mexilon right now. They're trying to drive the price down to less than 50 ISK, and my personal thinking here is that it is actually the lowered actual mining. Well, no, actually mining went up in nullsec in the metrics, but perhaps there's like lower production happening right now, or there's just less ISK being made in nullsec. That is definitely true in ratting, and so they can't just throw away and compete Mexilon to higher and higher prices in order to bring it into nullsec. That is possible. So the one aspect that we have to understand for Mexilon is that normally it is the bottleneck in 0.0. It is the one mineral that even if they mine everything they have available, it's the first mineral they'll lack basically. And so it's the one mineral that has really been able to maintain a price that was in the same range as before all of the mineral and the mining change, drawer, Cal, the moon mining, things like that. 60, 70 ISK was able to really maintain that very well. And while now titanium is coming back a little bit, pyrite is coming back a little bit, Mexilon is doing the exact opposite. And so there is a choice to be made. Do you think that this is a structural thing, or do you think that potentially this is a 1-year low point? You can now buy Mexilon for less than 50 ISK in all likeliness. Should should you make that investment hoping for a winter comeback, for instance, if they then all of a sudden need more capitals, more supers, and they jump in on that bottleneck again, but absolutely needing it, then they are going to pay a premium for Mexelon again from HiSec, and that could be a massive opportunity. On the other hand, if you think that this is a structural change, that for instance nullsec has adapted more to moon mining itself, and that they're including Mexelon in their calculations, they're basically mining more for Mexelon on a couple of specialized moons, for instance, that basically it's no longer that special bottleneck, and thus that demand just is not going to come back no matter what happens. That's a possibility as well. And so this is a bit of a gamble, but looking at this chart, of course, from 70 at the start of the year now to pretty much 50 ISK, that is a pretty serious decline and potentially a very nice opportunity. It is the counter to the movement of most of the other minerals, something to keep in mind as well. So let's go to isogen. Also stalling. We went up to 17.5 ISK on a couple of days, but you can see that at the tail end we're going back down a little bit. We're talking 16 ISK for 16.17 for the sellers, 16 ISK for the buyers, though a couple of buyers willing to pay 16 ISK for something that went as low as 14 on a couple of occasions. It's still not great. Isogen, the worst performing mineral after all of the changes. Basically it's the most oversupplied one across the universe. After that, we've got Noxium, that is also continuing its decline, heading for a one-year low point all of a sudden. 287 for the sellers, 270 for the buyers. That is very low, and here you could ask yourself the same question. Do you think that this is a structural thing, that perhaps they have also added more Noxium in the mix of their moon mining activities? Because I did read that in nullsec, because they don't want people in anomalies and belts like that anymore, but that they actually prefer you mine on a moon where there's actually a structure, easy eyes, and more defense available, that they're basically, you know, optimizing that aspect in 0.0 lots more. And perhaps, yeah, Noxium and Mexelon might just be part of those calculations. Or do you see this as a one-year low point? You're buying for 270. That's obviously below the entire chart. That could be seen as a nice investment opportunity as well, of course. After that, we've got Zydrine, that is okay, also falling off, doing really well over the last 6 months or so, holding on to a price above 500 ISK, but the pressure is too much. 477 now for the sellers, 411 for the buyers. Now that's a pretty big margin between sellers and buyers, and that's after a drop-off of sellers that were before 500 ISK just last week. So Zydrine is obviously pretty massively under pressure. We could see this as a normalization though. Compare Zydrine to Megasite. Normally Megasite is more expensive. We've been in the reverse for quite a bit at this point, and well, it's kind of a strange one for having held on so well over the last 6 to 8 months. We finally see a bit of a comeback in some of the minerals, and we actually see a drop off in Zydrine all of a sudden as well. So Zydrine, Mexelon, Isogen, but also a quick look at pyrite. It's looking like we might get overwhelmed with minerals at this point again. That doesn't bode well for the Rorcal pilots, in my opinion, if this is what's happening. CCP of course has all the metrics, and we know that actually mining went up in 0.0, so perhaps the mineral faucet is outdoing the increased value of ISK. Next up, we still have Megasite to take a look at. Yeah, that one also dropping off to another low point, where May to August we've been able to maintain a price of well above 400 ISK. Now we're talking 417 for the sellers, but 388 for the buyers. Again, pretty massive drop off here in the demand price, causing some problems for Megasite. And then finally we have Morphite, that was working on a one-year high last week and is still doing so. The one unique mineral that is actually at a one-year high point, and even historically speaking at an incredible price. 13,300 for the sellers, 12,200 for the buyers. Incredible sell opportunity, of course, if just a couple months ago you bought this stuff for 7,500 ISK. And what might be happening here, Morphite is tied to the Tech 2 economy, and perhaps here we actually see the increase in ISK value in the game itself show on Morphite. Why doesn't it show up on most of the others except for Tritanium? Why doesn't it show up on most of the other minerals? Well, because there is more mining happening in response to the danger that is added to ratting right now with the blackout, and potentially as well with the cyno changes. So yeah, the mineral market is a little bit in flux right now, with potentially some opportunities though. If you see Noxium at a 1-year low point, Mixlon at a 1-year low point, then that might be interesting, but it remains very risky considering the trend that we've had over the last couple of years. Still, keep the chaos era in mind. Who knows what CCP will still come up with. Next up, we have the PI market coming in at 1915. Like that. Let's get started on these. Let's see if we've got any signs of a late summer slump here, which is what I'm personally hoping for. And here in the broadcast notes, we do have a pullback down to 1.9 million apparently. Sellers coming in at just shy of 2 million ISK. Buyers though 1,741,000 ISK. If we try to get 175 on the chart, that's right here. So you are buying at the 1-year low point, very much below the chart. Potentially, yeah, if you have the patience, buy some broadcast notes for below 175. I think it is a good longer term investment. A first sign that the PI slump may just be happening late summer after the skilling spree and all of the skill points for people that were available for people that just kept playing the game over the summer. Next up, let's take a look at construction blocks. That one is still holding very well at 11,000 ISK, right on top of its average. Very nice. Just shy of that for the sellers, but look at the buyers. A bit of a lack of demand starting to show here as well. Less than 10,000 ISK for the buyers. Bit of a margin opening up, and just look at that. Not that many buy orders here, so potentially we could still see that September slump here as well. Next up, let's take a look at consumer electronics. Ooh, that's a nice drop off. Look at that, 11,000 here on the average price. It's still 12,200 for the sellers, but 11,000 for the buyers. And apparently, sellers are having trouble still maintaining that 12,000 ISK price. So look out here again. I am seeing the pressure for a late summer slump. Next up, we've got coolants still doing quite okay, actually back up in the last couple of weeks. And right now selling for, well, look at that. First few sellers coming in, 11,900 ISK, buyers at 11,400 is still very respectable. It's a great average price for coolants, but a bit of pressure at the tail end again. Not as obvious though as consumer electronics, for instance. Then the enriched uranium, after reaching 15,000 ISK again, is falling back just a little bit. 15,000 for the sellers, 13,800 here again. Actually a margin opening up with a bit of a lack of buying happening in the market. Next up, we've got the integrity response drones finally edging back down. Right now, I would say it's right on its average price on the 5-day moving average. 2.4 million just below that for the buyers, 2.2 million, 2.4 for the sellers and 2.2 million for the buyers. That's actually a normal average price for integrity response drones. The only thing that you could notice is of course that the 5-day moving average is obviously under pressure at the tail end here as well. Then we've got the mechanical parts. That is interesting, diving well below 11,000 ISK at this point. We're talking 10,700 for the sellers and buyers at 9,600 ISK, well shy of 10k. And look at the lack of demand here again. It is starting to look like a late summer slump for PI, especially in demand. So here you're buying for 9,600 ISK. That's around here on the chart, below everything. Yeah, if you're looking for that investment, or if there's one good right now that I'm going to stockpile rather than bring to the market and try to sell, it is mechanical parts. Very easy to produce, barren planets, really not that hard. Also, you can basically you just need 2 extractor products, which you can pretty easily balance normally on those planets. So that might be a good one for the later term, and maybe to start to invest in as well. Just put up a buy order at well below 10,000 ISK. I think you will actually be able to pick that up. Next up, we have nuclear reactors. All right, one counter movement to the one product in PI where I was hoping for more volatility than what we saw, and it's happening. We actually have a peak here all of a sudden, 114,000 disc almost for the sellers, 90,000 for the buyers. That is just a massive margin though. So this is showing a complete lack of production and a complete lack of demand. This is a crazy one to dive into, but what you could, for instance, try to buy for 95k, then try to sell for 109,000 disc or something like that. Would that be possible? Well, you'd be making ISK, but the problem is of course that the volumes are going to be very low. But it's a tiny trade that you could perhaps try right now. I'm just happy to see some volatility in the nuclear reactor market. Organic mortar applicators did really well to go back above average, but at the tail end again a little bit of pressure. 1.1 million seems to be its average, just above that for the sellers and a bit below that for the buyers. So right now we're basically on the average for organic mortar applicators. Bit of a pullback at the end though. Robotics, that one is going down towards a 1-year low point now, 95,000 on some daily averages. We're talking 99,000 for the sellers, but 91,000 for the buyers. Again, buyers opening up that margin. There's still a decent amount of them, but it's obviously falling back. Next up, self-harmonizing power cores. This one actually had a 1-year high point up to 2.4 million, but is falling back very quickly. That opportunity filled massively. Look at that in the last couple of days, down to less than 2.1 million. And here again, a lack of buyers. Buyers below 2 million ISK, and you don't see a lot of them anymore. Below 2 million, that is here on the chart. Here I'd have a bit more patience, especially with all of that supply coming in. They might just overshoot massively, driving all these buyers out of the market. That would be an insane opportunity for self-harmonizing power cores. Something to keep an eye on, I think. And another clear sign that the skilling spree has been decently successful to keep people in the game. And I was thinking that, well, if there's one thing that I do keep doing, it is my PI. So lots of people may have thought the exact same thing. Get out there, get those skill points from CCP, and then what else are you gonna do? Well, PI is a decently passive one, very quickly done, especially when you've got your regular set cycles. And so that is perhaps why we are seeing this late slump, which I thought would happen through the summer, but is only materializing now. After that, we get the superconductors. Again, 1-year low point. This one is actually quite okay. I've actually been under pressure, you know, quite a bit sooner here, mid-July, down to close to 10k in August again as well. A bit of noise outside, hope it doesn't come true. 11,400 for the sellers, 10,400 for the buyers, basically trading below average right now. Test cultures then finally jumping up just a little bit, getting back to 8k here. Honestly, if you haven't made your investments throughout the summer, you weren't gonna do it anyways. Bottoms at 6,000 disc below the entire chart, kind of crazy. So here it's normal that you're a little bit late. 8,000 for the sellers, 7,100 for the buyers. Yeah, that was actually something where I can understand that you don't make that move, but if you want that bit of buffer, something for the medium term that has really been struggling, well, look at this test culture market hitting 6,000 disc on several occasions. You can also see the volumes shoot up then in response. So I think that, you know, the players that wanted that test culture investment have had plenty of opportunity to actually grab it. Right now it's still really low, actually, historically speaking, especially that margin is still worrying, but the 1-year low points are probably past. If you ever see it go back to 6k on the buyers, I think it's pretty obvious what you should do if you want some of that cheap PI. And then finally, we've got to wait for our mainframes. That is continuing to do actually decently well, staying on its average here. 2.2 million, exactly a bit above that for the sellers, 2.1 million for the buyers. Not much to say here. That one is actually not showing signs of slowing down. It's basically doing a normal market action at the moment. So yeah, PI. Some signs though that demand is going down. I think the upcoming weeks and September could be very interesting for potential investments there. Next up, the advanced moon materials coming in at 27.45. Let's take a look at these. I thought most of them were actually a little bit under pressure last week. Crystalline carbonites, well, jumping off from the 150 band, but 142 on a couple of days. So here we have a decent spread apparently. Sellers are coming in at 160, buyers at 145. Bit of a margin opening up here, but actually maintaining an average price decently well. Ferrite carbide, a bit of pressure here as well, but nothing too dramatic. 157 for the sellers, 147 for the buyers. Pretty much an average price at this point as well. Then we have the titanium carbide market that is not doing that well after that big war jump here up to 275. Hasn't really been able to maintain a much higher price, but he's doing okay on the average as well. Actually 194 for the sellers is quite okay, 173 for the buyers. That's a bit of margin opening up here yet again, but this is also pretty much on the average and actually being able to defend that. Yeah, the one thing is here, these daily averages, sometimes the sellers that win out 195, then it's the buyers going down to 170. That's a decent margin here. Gotta be a little careful with that. But tungsten carbide here also doing quite okay. 212 to 13 in fact for the sellers, and just shy of 200 for the buyers, right around the average. Decently strong performance, I would say, managing to hold on despite, well, the potential summer slump, and we're not seeing like any major deployments in Nosec or anything like that, although there is a war that I saw a post on Reddit as well, so maybe some action is still happening. Let's take a look at the metamaterials next. Photonics, yeah, doing quite okay, getting back to that 20k, which is where we started the year, actually above average. If you look at this 1 year chart, 20,000 for the sellers, 19,000 for one buyer, but then it's 18,400. So again, look out for the margin, but the sellers are still able to keep that average price and even an above average price here for the photonic metamaterials. Plasmonics, yeah, 1 year high point, holding on to 25k on a lack of supply. 25,000 for the sellers, 23,600 for the buyers. Forced up quite a little bit, doing really nicely. All right, next up, nonlinear metamaterials. This one is around its average, actually. 27,000 for the sellers, 25,000 for the buyers. Again, decent margin. This is not that bad, but be careful here. And then we have the terahertz metamaterials, another 1 year high point, selling for 28,400 disc, buyers at 26,400. Again, margin 2,000 disc here. It's not that bad, but you gotta be a little careful here. If demand slows down, we could go down very quickly. But the sell prices for metamaterials are well above average on most of them. Actually, a very strong performance. If you could have bought these in the slumps, like here, it's quite a while ago, but if you could, then you'd have made a very nice trade yet again. And terahertz, yeah, we had that 1 year high point. Then we've got some other advanced boom materials. Here is fermionic condensates, exact opposite, actually heading for a 1 year low point here. 91,000 for the sellers, 85,000 for the buyers. That is pretty low on the buyer side of things. Perhaps one investment opportunity right here for the longer term. Decently volatile, going up to 100k, 110k is possible. Buying for 85 now, well, that is basically the spread that we can expect, and we're at the low point. Next up, we've got ferrogel. That one is actually recovering quite nicely, selling now for 50,000 disc, buyers at 49,000 disc. That's a margin that we like to see. That's obviously a pretty good indication that we've got a strong performance here for ferrogel, and we're well above average at 50k. Fullerides next. Let's see if I can get that chart to show up. Basically a nice recovery, 1100. Competition is starting to come in, though. It's 1080 ISK now for the sellers. The buyers are staying put, they're staying below 1000 ISK. They want that cheap Fullerite. So a bit of a bump here on probably a bit of a lack of supply all of a sudden, bumping the price up by 10%. Hypersynaptic fibers doing quite okay as well. Bit of pressure at the tail end, but 13 to 14k seems to be the range. Yep, 13,200, 100 for the sellers, 12,900. Again, I like this lower margin here. It means 13k is the price for hypersynaptic fibers, and that is around the average for the year. Then we've got nano transistors, actually a 1 year high point here, 6,000 disc on a complete lack of supply. Buyers forced up to that price point as well. So very nice. Phenolic composites. Yeah, this one is not doing that well, but at least he's away from the bottoms, well away from 2,000 disc here, 2,300 for the sellers, 2,200 for the buyers. Yeah, these other advanced moon materials I have surprisingly low margins, so there does seem to be decent demand in these, which means that potentially if you have ways of bringing these to the market, you're actually looking at some really good prices right now. And finally we get ceramic fibers dipping back down a little bit at the tail end, but still 511 for the sellers, 480 for the buyers. Not that much of a margin, only 30 ISK, and doing decently well on the average price range here as well. So advanced moon materials, pretty nice. What I am worried is that I do see some margins opening up, especially in the carbide stuff. But very strong performances in some of the other advanced moon materials here. So definitely starting to look like the seller's market is coming back here, which is very interesting, of course, because this stuff still does need to be imported from nullsec, and seeing that they are basically able to dictate a price and actually command a decent price is very nice actually. Next up, the Tech 2 ships. That's coming in at 3410. There we go. Let's get started here with the Aries. Alright, went up to 30 million ISK, back under pressure. Less than that, 29 billion now for the sellers, still 25.6 for the buyers. It's pretty cheap, it's a decent margin, but we've been here before. The Aries volume's going down as well, I would say, so be a little careful with buying too many of those. Let's see what the Basilisk is doing. Holding strong at around 250 on average. It's actually 243 for the sellers and 233 for the buyers. Take a quick look at 233 on the chart. That's definitely not the bottom prices. So here again, around average, a normal price, margin wise not too much, so this actually looks like a regular market situation. Cerberus, same thing, coming from a decently high point of around 280, landing at around 250 on the chart, 255 for the sellers, 236 for the buyers, really narrow margin, average price yet again. Then we've got the Crow. That one is actually going back up in price to 35 million ISK. 34 now for the sellers, 31 for the buyers. I mean, there's not much to say. You're not gonna buy these as an investment, but it's pretty much the average price here again. Let's see if the Guardian is able to maintain. Yep, 230, right on the money. 234 for the sellers, 204 for the buyers though. All right, the first one here where again I see a bit of a margin opening up. That is quite low, 204, not low enough to say, all right, definitely gonna grab a Guardian, but that margin opening up could potentially mean more opportunities. What you would then need to see though is more than just 2 sell orders coming in the last 24 hours. If that starts to increase, then this will potentially start to go down as well. Otherwise, yeah, Guardian is still doing decently well actually. Especially considering a 204 buy price, 234 sell price, and then an average above 230 on the chart, it's actually pretty obvious that it's a seller's market right now as well. If that ever changes, that's when you've got potentially a very quick opportunity in the Guardian market. Then we've got the Heretic. That one is actually going back down in price after actually jumping up from 70 to 80 million ISK. Just, yeah, really surprised to see the lack of interest, demand and destruction in the interdictors. 73 million now for the sellers, 61 million for the buyers. And you can see the lack of demand, of course, in the number of buy orders on the market. It's just not doing well. I would say if you're looking for that Tech 2 investment, if you're willing to gamble on the really long term, I would say some interdictors should be in your inventory just in case of a redesign or something like that from CCP, if they also see the same thing here. I mean, this is a surprisingly low price, has been for like a year straight. Volumes are even going down as well, less than 25 a day. This ship just isn't there anymore, it seems. And yeah, those buyers, they're just dropping off a cliff here. 61 million, that's a healthy margin if you want to trade, of course. Then we've got some stealth bombers, of course. The Hound is landing at 30 million, getting back to, I would say, an average again. 30 million for the sellers, 26 for the buyers. Here, normal, average, definitely too early to call it a buy opportunity. The Ishtar is going low yet again. Let's see here, sellers 212, buyers 199. Buyers have managed to bring the price down to less than 200 million ISK. That is pretty cheap, but I guess the availability is a little bit too high for the Ishtar right now, and apparently the meta switch after the Vexor Navy issue change, well, it's not really Ishtars that they're going for right now. After that, which is actually normal if you think about it, you've got alpha options like the Myrmidon, like the Dominix for 5 heavy drones as well. So in all likeliness, this was a bit of a spurt to the Ishtar because people assumed that what was going to happen, especially here on the volumes. But overall, people are probably looking at Tick 1 options. Then we've got the Manticore, a bit of pressure as well. 27 million would be a nice bottom. Yeah, we're still 30 to 33 million for the sellers, 30 million for the buyers. Again, right around an actual average, maybe a touch below average for the Manticore, but still a reasonable price. Then we've got the Munin continuing its descent after doing really well to get to 300 million ISK. Is now selling for 247, buyers at 235. Well, doesn't look like we're gonna overshoot and get below 230 anytime soon. I don't think so. Although the volatility is dangerous, we'll see. Then we got the Nemesis. That one is actually dropping off a cliff very quickly from 33 million down to 27 for the sellers, 25.5 for the buyers. I still need some of those to get competed out before I dive in personally, but you can see that it's quite a bit of competition at that 25.5 million range. If we go below that, yeah, I'd say potentially the Nemesis overshoots and you should grab one below 25 million ISK. Oniros managing to come back up in price actually on super low volumes though. So this one is 215 for the sellers, 180 for the buyers, pretty massive margin. Sellers market yet again able to dictate that higher price. The Purifier next, also coming down from a nice 1-year high bond at 50 million ISK for a stealth bomber. Crazy good price. Back down to 30 million. Our buyer substantially below that. Yeah, 27. Lack of demand. This one is already interesting. 30.5 million for the sellers. 27 million for the buyers. If you look at this chart, we tried to get something like 27 million showing. That is pretty damn low. I would say if you want that Tick 2 investment right now in something that I absolutely love, it is the stealth bombers. Look at these peaks, 40, 40, 40, 40. 50 million at the high points, and then lows below 30 million ISK. That's where you can make trades, that's where you can make ISK. Well, look at that, Purifiers, lack of demand here, buying for 27 million ISK. Not bad in my opinion, an opportunity. Then we've got the Saber, continued pressure here as well, from 70 down to 65 million ISK, 65 for the sellers, 58.7 for the buyers. This again, if you want to take that longer term gamble, grab yourself a Saber for less than 60 million ISK and hope for a comeback. It's something that is definitely possible, although it feels like it needs a miracle considering this 1-year chart basically. Then we have the Scimitar, actually decently strong as well for a low volume logistics cruiser, so not bad. 258 for the sellers, 230 for the buyers, actually much better than the Oniros as well in its margin and selling for an above average price. And then finally we've got the Stiletto that is also dropping off a cliff, looking to play with a low point here as well. 27 million for the sellers, 26.5 though. Here that margin hasn't opened up like with the Purifier, so here I would say I'd still be patient, although 26.5 million is definitely at the lower end as well of this chart. Yeah, but the Purifier to me, considering these spikes, is the most interesting buy opportunity for the week, I would say. After that, take 3 ships, moving in at 4150. Let's take a look at the destroyers. First, as always, we've got the Confessor continuing pretty much flat, just below 40 million ISK. 39.5 for the sellers, 35 million for the buyers. Volume-wise, last 24 hours, that is finally drying up. So we are definitely seeing a switch away from the Confessor, which is now selling for less than 40 million ISK. Buyers, not that many either, bit of margin here, but noticeably, last 24 hours, you're not really seeing lots of ships. Volumes are respectable, it's doable, but you see that the big ones are already coming in at 41 million ISK. Let's see, then the Hecate went up to 47.5 and that one is dropping off to 42.5. 43 million for the sellers, 39 million for the buyers, and here is the volumes. 70, 31, 30, 35. Last 24 hours you also have almost half a front page here with, well, decent amounts as well. And so yeah, production switched from the Confessor to the Headgate, which drove the price down by 5 million ISK around there, to a much closer sell price between these two, and actually nothing outrageous. This is the good news, I would say. You don't see 200, 400 Headgates being brought to the market because you could have sold them at 45 million ISK. Nope, much more reasonable, basically regular market activity. The Jackdaw was pretty high last week as well. We can see that that one is going down to less than 45 million, 43 million for the sellers, 37.5 and 40 million for, but most at 37.5. And here in the last 24 hours, more than half a page, again 26, 35, 37. So this is very nice to see, closing that gap as well. And the Confessor now potentially could go up in price a little bit. You don't need that many more to push it to 41 million ISK, that many more sales. So yeah, this is very nice to see that. Although it's a little bit later than I expected, I thought we would, you know, here in early August you had this peak in the Headgate, in the Jackdaw, then the mid one. That came a little bit as a surprise, but yeah, it happens, which is very nice for a healthy Tech Tree Destroyer market. Prices go up on lack of availability, and then supply starts to move in, like now, bringing the price back down, which means that we get some breathing room because we don't see any Confessors being brought to the market, which gives that a little bit of time to recover and potentially find its way above 40 million as well. Finally, we've got this Vapel that seems to be under pressure, counter to my expectation and counter to what we saw here. It's actually dipping below 37.5 million, 38 for the sellers, 35.6 for the buyers, but again, notice last 24 hours, nothing coming in anymore. So finally, producers switched to the Headgate and to the Jackdaw to take advantage of the higher price, and things are normalizing. Although I think we'll probably need 1 or 2 more weeks to see to get back to that 40 million average range, and then perhaps something could happen. Perhaps someone buys a big Jackdaw fleet, seeing that the price has gone down nicely or something like that, and then it's back on for the same economic game right here. This Vapel, least popular one, but also 2, 3, 2, 4, 5, just need less than 20 of them and you're at 40 million as well for the sellers, and just 3 more and you're at 41 million. So it's not out of the question that on a lack of supply we could actually see this one bump back to 40 million as well. Very nice. This is exactly what you would expect in a healthy market, where there's not too much supply, there's decent demand, everything is well balanced. So this to me makes it feel like, yeah, these tactical destroyers are great ships to use across New Eden at the moment. When it comes to the cruisers, let's take a look at that. The Legion, which went up to 190, is now slowly going back down. So basically competition started off at that 200 million relisting. You can see them then come in, and then in the last 24 hours we have a lot of Legions driving the price back down to 174. Still 164 for the buyers though. If you look at this part of the chart, it was to 140. So they have managed to increase the price on average quite substantially for quite a while with that relisting. I personally think it was market manipulation. Next up, we've got the Loki that is going flat at around 190 million. It's the most popular Tech Tree cruiser, it has to be said. Supply wise, this is a lot more normal. Just a couple of new sell orders. Volume wise, nothing too crazy. Availability is quite good. Buyers at 174. This is a normal margin as well, maybe slightly higher than normal, but definitely looking like an okay, pretty stable Loki at 190. And so then, with this being considered the best tactical cruiser, 190 million, the Legion going up to 190 all of a sudden with that kind of volatility on, if you remember what was complete lack of availability, it's not a normal market reaction. It should have been much slower, I think, if this was like a regular price evolution in the Legion. Then we've got the Proteus that's also pretty much flat at 160. Proteus much less popular, in fact the least popular cruiser, so a little bit above average or a normal price range at least. Same here with the Loki, a bit below average, maybe on some more availability, but that Legion volatility is just coming out of nowhere. So the Proteus is flat at 165 million ISK, 158, and here, look at that. I mean, you get 11 here, you get 22 here, and then down here you get some more trying to sell at 200 million ISK, but the availability is not good at all. This is primed for another manipulation attempt. You don't need that much ISK to drive the price back up to like 190 million ISK. Try to relist, try to get that spike going, just like with the Legion. Yeah, it's a dangerous situation in the Proteus market for now. I think normal market forces are doing their thing. 168 to 165, once 1 of 11, but the volumes aren't too crazy. This still looks normal, but it is basically primed to go back up on anyone that wants to give that a go. And then we've got the Tengu, which is like in between Legion, Loki, and then the Proteus as the least popular one. Is doing okay, 180 million as well, 178 in fact for the sellers, 162 for the buyers, and here availability is a little bit better. Just like with the Loki actually, if you look at the Loki availability, you can see that that is quite okay. It's going to be a bit harder to manipulate that to an extreme price. Same with the Tengu. Right here, availability, nothing too crazy, but at least there's some coming in with decent amounts, so that's all right. The Proteus though, that's a dangerous situation again here, having that flat price, but the volumes, they just aren't there. I'd be careful here when it comes to the tech tree market. At least the Loki and the Tengu, I would say those two are in a regular place, especially if you want to use them. These are great ships actually. I just trained for the Tengu. I should definitely grab one as well, perhaps to hunt some scouts. That could be interesting, although not very alpha friendly. But for investments, yeah, the Proteus might then look like the most interesting one because it is the cheapest one, but I think that is very dangerous thing to do, in my opinion. Yeah, the Tech Tree Cruiser market just doesn't have that healthy feeling that the Tech Tree Destroyer market has, in my opinion. And then finally, we will do the extra product, which is the Faction Battlecruisers, coming in at 49.55. 49.55, like that. All right, let's take a look at that. I usually forget about them. I mean, faction frigates, that makes a lot of sense, of course, because you've got the pirate faction ships that are quite famous, and then the cruisers because of the Gila, and then the battleships. Of course, you know, you get faction versions of that, but the battle cruisers actually also have a faction battle cruiser segment. It's only navy factions, but the reason I'm now thinking about this is because the Drake Navy issue, well, you guys will get a video on that next week, but an incredible scout hunter so far, so that makes me quite interested. Let's start though with the Brudix Navy issue, the Galente side of Galente warfare, and we're obviously well above average for the Brudix Navy issue. 190 million for one seller, but most sellers are at 201 million ISK, buyers coming in at 160, well above average. So obviously Galente LP is very expensive at the moment. They should be losing faction warfare right now. The bottom is 130. That's a very nice increase in price before the summer, and right now they're still apparently suffering. Although we're down just a touch over the course of the summer, we're still well above average. And then, because that's what I bought for some Triglavian scout hunting, 100 million ISK only for a Drake Navy issue. That is a crazy one-year low point. Galente, Caldari LP should be super cheap. 110 million for the sellers, 100 million for the buyers. That's a very cheap Drake Navy issue. That is, and for what it does, it's incredible. I'm really enjoying flying this ship at the moment, which is why I chose this as the extra product. And then we still have Amar and Minmatar. Amar is winning out as well. Look at that Harbinger Navy issue, 130 million ISK, even less than that for the sellers, 106 for the buyers. Now, if you're looking for that faction warfare investment, I mean, there is no clearer picture than this and this, in my opinion. And then the Brudix Navy issue, you'd be selling those. Hurricane Navy issue also going back up here to 140, 146 for the sellers, 116, excuse me, for the buyers. Low point is 110. So this one lacks the volatility, to be honest. Doesn't have as good a range as the others, but Brudix Navy issue, that's a very nice difference. And then the Drake Navy issue and the Harbinger Navy issue. I mean, I bought one to fly it, and if I eventually get tired of it, I'm gonna wait for this to shoot back up to 200 million ISK. That is crazy. Let's see how high the Drake goes. 200 to 250 is possible. That's potentially a 100% return on these investments. This is kind of crazy. This is filled with opportunity. Very, and this is an incredible ship as well. I do wonder what the Hurricane Navy issue actually looks like. It's got some drone capacity, which is good. Damage tracking speeds, okay, and then it's fitting 8 high slots, 2, 4, 6. Okay, could have 2 salvagers in there perhaps, and then Harbinger, which is actually the cheap one. Let's take a look at that. Does it have 75 and 50 drone capacity? That is not so bad. Tracking speed and damage here as well. Interesting. And then the fitting 7, 5, 6, 2, 4, 6. Yeah, that extra high slot as well. I mean, this is interesting. Honestly, guys, battlecruisers, I absolutely love them for that Triglavian scout hunting, and I absolutely enjoy that activity as well. If you're looking for something that doesn't need too much travel time, doesn't need too much looking, I think it's great. And yeah, these are great ships. And the best one, in my opinion, excuse me, it's not battleships, it's battlecruisers, faction battlecruisers, is basically going for next to nothing. It makes me want to look at the Drake. So this one costs 100 million ISK. It's got 7 launchers right here, and if we look then at variations, the Drake only has 6 launchers, if I'm not mistaken. 2, 4, yeah, 6 launchers right here. And then if we view the market details, this one is costing 45 million ISK, and also went up together with the mineral prices. That's quite interesting. But normally you could say a Drake Navy issue could cost like 4 times as much as a Drake. Now it only costs twice as much as a Drake. 100 million ISK is actually very doable for such an incredible ship, for that Navy upgrade basically. Very, very interesting. Oh, maybe I should look at the others as well. Let's take a quick look at so the Brutix Navy issue, for instance, is going for 200 million ISK here. And what does a Brutix cost? Look at that, less than 45 million ISK. Yeah, normally you could go 3-4 times the price of the regular Tech 1 version. Now that this one is so cheap, yeah, it's really very, very nice. And then for the Minmatar one, we're talking the Hurricane that costs 40 million ISK. And then in the Mar, it was the Harbinger that also cost 45 million ISK. Actually up in price a little bit, all these Tech 1 battle cruisers as well. But this is very, very interesting because you don't have pirate factions here. You can just look straight at Galente LP, super expensive right now, 200 million ISK. Drake Navy issue, 1 year low point, very, very cheap, absolutely investment worthy. Harbinger Navy issue, same thing. And then Hurricane Fleet issue is a little bit of that. There's just not enough of it. I think the volumes are a bit too low, but it is definitely at a high point as well right now, showing what's happening in faction warfare and crazy opportunities right here, in my opinion. Especially if you want to get into some Triglavian scout hunting, this is something you should grab, in my opinion. Anyways, that's gonna make it this EVE Talk for the week, guys. Thank you very much for watching, and as always, I'll see you all next time.